The Catcher in the Rye by Jack Richman. The Catcher in the Rye is a well-written story of the adventure of the main character, Holden Caulfield. Holden Caulfield's adventure living in New York City was quite extraordinary, yet believable. Even though J.D. Salinger's iconic novel, The Catcher in the Rye, was published in 1954, readers today are still able to resonate with what is said in the novel. J.D. Salinger was able to capture and retain our attention by shining light on ideas and issues revolving around the idea of adolescence. These ideas and issues are extremely relevant to this day. The main protagonist, Holden Caulfield, serves as someone you can relate to, or could have related to, at some point in your life. The setting of New York in the 1950s is a compelling backdrop for the novel that still intrigues readers today, which is an additional reason to why the novel is still so popular in 2019. J.D. Salinger uses strong themes to move the plot and allows for longevity of the novel. Holden's view on the world that everyone is a phony is very prevalent today. With the introduction of social media, people are almost never what they portray to be. J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye is a timeless classic, beloved by many, and studied in many schools. The synopsis. The novel is told from this perspective of a narrator. His name is Holden Caulfield, who is a 16-year-old boy that struggles with isolation and the idea of adulthood. The novel opens with Holden Caulfield speaking from a mental hospital in California. He says he'll tell the story of what happened to him just before the previous Christmas. Right before Christmas break, Holden has been expelled from prep school for the 4th time due to the fact that he was failing the majority of his classes. Instead of waiting until the Wednesday to travel home, Holden has had enough of his roommates and the people at Pensy Prep and decides to go on an adventure to New York City for 48 hours before returning home. Upon arrival, Holden checks into the Edmond Hotel. For the duration of his stay, he smokes, he goes to bars, he lies, and he decides he never wants to live at home. In New York City, he meets up with one of his ex-girlfriends, Sally, and asks her if she wants to run away with him to New England. She rejects the idea and Holden proceeds to shout and insult her. On his adventure, Holden meets a lot of new people, from tourists from Seattle to nuns, his brother's ex-girlfriend, and even gets beaten up by a pimp. Holden even sleeps on a park bench in Central Park Station to stay away from his house. Eventually, he heads home to visit his younger sister Phoebe. The story ends with him suggesting that he will be receiving help and he hopes to attend another school in the fall. The novel The Catcher in the Rye contains strong themes related to the adolescent years that make the novel so timeless and beloved. There are many themes explored in the novel, such as loss of innocence, isolation, depression, phonies, teenage rebellion, and sexuality. The most prevalent theme in J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye is isolation and depression as a result. The teenage years of one's life are a time in which they are very misunderstood. Your body is changing and your emotions are at all-time highs. It is often easy to alienate yourself in this time span rather than having to deal with the rest of society. Being a teenager comes with all sorts of new experiences, whether they be internal or external. As you near adulthood, teenagers are found with more independence to be used in a mature manner. The new responsibilities they are given tend to result in irrational behavior, such as acts of rebellion, or not taking school seriously, or not listening to their parents. Society is able to see everything surrounding a teenager, such as his or her actions, but are unable to see and feel what is going on inside the body. Emotional issues and internal battles can lead to isolation and depression. depression, which can be easily missed due to the fact that these external behaviors being exhibited are expected from a normal teenager. My thesis statement is J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye communicates the theme of teenage isolation and depression through the character of Holden Caulfield, a teenager who believes he is surrounded by people that are phonies. In the novel, Holden's parents were not very present in his life, which pushed him towards isolation. After being sent home from Pincy Prep School, Holden immediately decides that he is not going home but instead to New York City alone. This proves that his house is not somewhere he feels comfortable. Even while in New York, he wishes he could go home. He feels alone and even asks his cab driver to go out for a drink with him. And he also says, I kept wishing I could go home and shoot the bull for a while with old Phoebe. Holden's father, who is not named, is said to be a successful lawyer but does not attempt to have a meaningful father-son relationship with Holden. Especially during one's teenage years, it is important to have a fatherly figure in your life so you can have someone to look up to and to get advice from. Holden's dad proves that he does not want to have anything to do with Holden by saying he would send him to military school. After the death of Holden's younger brother Ali, Holden's mother has still not recovered emotionally. Like her husband, she does not have a relationship with Holden, which is a contributing factor to his isolation and depression. According to psychologists, if the child is being neglected by their parents, the child may even stop trying, and the loneliness that follows may actually be easier to deal with than shame, humiliation, or neglect. Studies show that the relationship between depression and pure isolation are reciprocal, but the primary direction and the effect from neglect experiences lead to depression. Holden does not have many close friends. The people he considers to be his friends at Pincy Prep do not see him as a friend, which is a contributing factor to his isolation and depression. His roommate, Ward Stradler, who is said to be arrogant and take advantage of Holden. After Holden is expelled, Ward Stradler asks Holden to write him an English essay while he goes out on a date with Jane Gallagher, one of Holden's friends, and on the date, he wears Holden's jacket. Upon returning, Ward Stradler does not like the topic of the essay that Holden chose, which was Ali's baseball glove, an emotional symbol for Holden, and then he proceeds to mock Holden for failing all of his classes. They eventually get into a fistfight when Ward Stradler says that he had sex with his date. The fight results in Holden receiving a bloody nose. Not wanting to stay in the room with Ward Stradler, Holden goes next door to Robert Ackley's room, but after an ungrateful welcome and being told there's nowhere for him to sleep, at this point he knows that he is not accepted and says, "Boy, did I feel rotten. I felt so damn lonely." Not being accepted by his friends to sleep in their dorms, this forced Holden to make an impulsive decision to leave immediately and make the journey to New York City to stay at the inexpensive Edmond Hotel. When at Pincy Prep, Holden felt like he did not have any real friends who cared for him, but in fact he had so-called friends that did not reciprocate the friendship opportunity they were given. Research has shown that relationships in a social life are essential for good mental health. It has been said that a network of positive social relationships provides a source of support, meaning, and guidance which can influence long term trajectories of health outcomes. Loneliness has major health concerns. According to a Harvard study, loneliness has an equivalent risk factor to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, shortening one's lifespan by 8 years. Holden's teachers at Pincy Prep are also a contributing factor to his isolation and depression. The first teacher we encounter in the novel is Mr. Spencer, who is Holden's former history teacher. Mr. Spencer tells Holden, "Life is a game, boy. Life is a game that one plays according to the rules." He believes that Holden is failing his classes due to the lack of effort instead of an internal battle. Instead of being supported towards Holden, Mr. Spencer embarrasses him by making him read a history assignment that he failed and asks Holden to justify the reasons for being expelled from his former schools. Holden escapes his conversation with Mr. Spencer because he feels as if he is being lectured. Mr. Spencer was trying to tell him what to do instead of trying to understand what Holden is going through. Another teacher we encounter in the novel is Mr. Antolini. Mr. Antolini was Holden's former English teacher at Pincy Prep. Unlike Mr. Spencer, Holden respects Mr. Antolini. When Holden is in New York, he is invited over to the Antolini's home to spend the night. While at his house, Holden is able to blow off steam by listing his problems to Mr. Antolini, who is an active, attentive listener. When Holden is awoken, he finds Mr. Antolini stroking his hair, and his opinion on him immediately switches. He says, "I know more damn perverts at schools and all than anybody you ever met, and they're all always being perverty when I'm around." So now he sees him as a pervert. This forces Holden to sleep on a bench at Central Park Station. According to Mental Health America, sexual assault can have a variety of short and long-term effects on a victim's mental health. Many survivors report flashbacks of their assault, feelings of shame, isolation, shock, confusion, and guilt. Research has concluded that people may feel ashamed or dirty or scared. They may pull back from society and from friends and family. Holden Caulfield is a perfect example of a teenager fighting an internal battle with, which is invisible to the majority of people around him. The people surrounding Holden, such as his parents, friends, and teachers, are naive to the situation and believe that Holden's irrational behavior was due to him being a normal teenager. The lack of understanding by the people surrounding Holden caused him to be almost as well be isolated and be in a state of depression. The problems regarding isolation and depression that Holden faced in the novel are very relevant even to this day. Mental health is a tremendously large issue in the present day that affects all age groups, but the most frequent victims are teenagers. The awareness and understanding of the mental health has improved in 60 years since the novel was published, but society still has to go a long way before we can understand and help the stigma. Some discussion questions that I thought about while reading the novel was, what would you have recommended Holden's parents, friends, and teachers have done to help him out of his state of depression and isolation? Another is, the novel was written a very long time ago but includes some major themes that are very relevant today. How are people currently dealing with these issues? And finally, have you ever seen someone else dealing with a similar situation as the one Holden is dealing with in the novel? If so, what advice would you give them?